Joe Brusic in the house this morning with us. Joe, what's going on? What's going on in our state here? We're reading about cops, just police officers. They're quitting across the board. We've got lawmakers, clamping down on police reforms. We got possession laws that are now misdemeanors.
Well, it's a very complicated time, and unfortunately, the way I'd characterize, I'm on the legislative committee for the Washington Association of Prosecuting Attorneys, and during the course of the last several months during the session, we've routinely met through Zoom at least once a week to discuss the various bills that are affecting, generally speaking, prosecutors and some others, but essentially looking at police reform. This session, it was grandiose in nature. It was more activity on police reform than ever before in the legislature. And I have to say I'm very concerned as to where this is all heading. It does not feel good from a law enforcement's perspective. And one of the reasons that I wanted to get back into the prosecutor's office and am so passionate about not just my job but being part of a great team at the Yakima County Prosecutor's Office is that we get to work daily with law enforcement officers. So we see it firsthand on a daily basis. We not only read all the reports and talk to them by phone or in person, but we try to balance their work and support them and try to make sure they do their job and they make sure we do our job. And getting back to work with law enforcement officers was one of the supreme reasons I wanted to get back into this office. And it's just a very difficult time for police, for all law enforcement. I've said before, and I truly believe that in all my years, I'm about to be 58 years of age in June. I can tell you that the hardest job that I believe in the United States of America is being a police officer. No question about it. Because we expect them to do things that 90% of the people in our society, our communities, don't want to do. They don't want to engage when those things happen. And we all know what those things are. And it's really difficult to see laws passed that put them in a position where they do, as you were just talking about, they want to retire, they want to move on. It's hitting our community. We're seeing a tremendous amount of officers retiring as soon as they reasonably can. We're seeing very few applicants for law enforcement positions. We're seeing the changing of the guard for law enforcement and the respect that they have throughout our society. And I think it's just absolutely tragic. Where
do we start? Right there. I mean, do you believe that these laws that were passed, for example, I'm an officer and I see my fellow officer doing something that I disagree with, maybe using some use of force. I have to stop him now. Right? I mean,
there's a duty to intervene now because of one of the bills that is going to get the governor's signature. And I understand what that means. It puts accountability and the onus on your fellow law enforcement officers to do the right thing. However, you're asking a law enforcement officer in a very stressful situation or a group of officers, much like the Floyd situation, to make decisions regarding their colleagues when, in fact, by doing so, they're now putting themselves in a greater way to be harmed, both the person that they're dealing with as well as themselves and other law enforcement officers. So it's not just a simplistic fix to say this law enforcement officer has to stop this law enforcement officer from engaging in tactics that are being used to arrest or to proliferate the laws and stop criminality. And that's the problem, is that a lot of this stuff, a lot of the police reform, they're putting the onus on law enforcement officers as opposed to the rest of society. And so instead of this legislature saying tough on crime issues, they're saying we're going to get tough on cop issues. And that
that's right.
It's
that's
a
right.
difficult
All right,
situation.
So if that person who is using that force is called into question before these new laws were put into place, you would handle that situation, right? I mean, you would review that, and that would stay in county, right?
Yeah, basically.
A review of a use of force would stay in county. Now goes to the state? How does it? What's the change now?
It's still with the county prosecutors. But I can tell you probably at least half of the elected county prosecutors in the state of Washington now really do want to push these officer use of force issues, especially with use of deadly force, lethality. They want to push them to other county prosecutors. They want to push them out of their jurisdiction. I believe that I'm qualified to make the decision. I talk with law enforcement. We have a special investigations unit. We routinely meet. We talk about these things. Basically, I'm put in this position through the vote of the people, and I can be removed as quickly as I was put here. And I always respect that authority. And so for us as county prosecutors, we review that officer use of force. And I believe that it works, especially after 940 passed. Now, you have 1310, which just passed, which is waiting for a governor's signature. And it forces, once again, it limits the ability of engagement by law enforcement officers. It forces them through this law to de-escalate and to make split-second decisions trying to avoid the use of deadly force at all costs, really, is what we're talking about. And, once again, law enforcement officers they are 911. They run to the danger. We don't. They go to exactly that situation where they may not be coming home to be with their family again. And because of that, we're asking them to make a decision within a second or two. And it's amazing that the legislature is, from a global position, is saying law enforcement have to be just that much more careful when they're making a decision whether they have to use force. Once again, what you're going to see is you're going to see two things. You're going to see possibly more law enforcement officers killed or seriously injured. And what we're already seeing from law enforcement officers around the country and even locally is the preference to, do we engage?
Yeah, retreat.
And
not only at the moment, but at the profession.
That's
right? We're pulling away
Exactly.
from searches, Ferguson effect, if you will. I'm not going to take the action that I might have taken last week because this time around it can carry X. And meanwhile, the situation is playing out. So we're putting other people in jeopardy for those extra split seconds as well. And then to the greatest extent, and that's cops leaving the profession because they don't believe they can execute what's being asked of them in a way that will keep them safe while they try to keep the rest of us safe.
Yeah, and in my conversations with law enforcement officers from all the various agencies, they absolutely say that. I mean, they recognize the fact that it is a very difficult time to make some of those very difficult decisions that we ask for them to put their lives on the line for us, and yet if they do anything outside as perceived by other non-law enforcement officers, that they're at fault automatically. So you not only have the potential of criminality, of criminal charging, always, but you also have civil liability issues. And so, now you have officers that are worried about not just their own physical health, but you have them worried about their financial ruin.
Yeah.
And it really does come down to a situation where the rules are getting so onerous for law enforcement to follow. And trust me, the law enforcement officers in our community, in Yakima County, work exceptionally very, very hard to do the right thing. They're not engaging people to cause harm. They're the ones that are preventing harm. They're out there trying to help people constantly, daily basis. And it's absolutely imperative that everybody understands that. Now, our community understands that. Yakima County people generally understand that, and they love their law enforcement officers. It's not the same thing over on the west side of the I-5 corridor, and that's where a lot of this is coming down.
Right.
A lot of this is they see, especially in the bigger cities around the nation, as well as in say Seattle or Portland, they believe that officers are in fact, they're biased. They want to hurt people. They don't think about those things that they should think about as law enforcement officers, and that's why you have an objective and subjective standard. When we look at under 940, you look at those things in which to judge an officer use of force. And that's why you look at what the officer knew at the time, what that officer was experiencing at the time when they made that decision to use deadly force upon a person.
Joe, just a couple minutes left, and we want to ask you, they're also taking away the tools that those officers use to investigate it. I mean, the possession law, that was a tool that a lot of the officers used. It's kind of back now. How does this misdemeanor possession law, how does it work? How will it help officers? How will it help people?
Well, I could spend the net. We spent numerous hours talking about the Blake fix and what has come down since February 25th when State versus Blake came about. Everyone knows that simple possession went away with the Supreme Court decision. Now with 5476, passing this weekend and waiting for a governor's signature. And it will become law upon his signature because of an emergency clause in the bill. So upon his signature, which could come today, it makes simple possession a misdemeanor now, which has total penalties of up to 90 days of confinement and up to $1,000 fine. It passed the House 80-18. It barely passed the Senate, really on party lines, 26-23. And there was a lot of big-time discussion in the Senate because all of the Republican senators didn't like the fact that it was only a misdemeanor. Misdemeanor, generally speaking, a misdemeanor, you can arrest as a law enforcement officer if a misdemeanor is committed in your presence. A gross misdemeanor, you don't have to have that. A gross misdemeanor obviously has stricter penalties. A misdemeanor, this has got a sunset provision, 2 years.
Right.
And then I believe at that point, unless through this study that they're now engaging in, it would be a civil infraction. So if you possess cocaine, you could be cited no differently than if you had just committed speeding.
So you don't expect the teeth to, I mean, any kind of, you don't expect it to get tougher.
No.
Yeah, you expect this to get even
the
even
legislature
more
made
lenient.
it clear that they backed
Yeah.
the Supreme Court's
Yeah.
ruling. The Democratic senators and representatives clearly backed what the Supreme Court came down with in terms of Blake. And the chance of simple possession ever becoming a felony again is slim to none, and Slim just left town.
Yeah, Slim left town. Wow. Well, you've got a big job ahead of you. How do you keep our officers in Yakima? How do we attract officers to Yakima?
It's a problem, and one of they don't see it the way that they used to see it, in my humble opinion, when I was a prosecutor all those years before. They see it as more of a job where, and that I take nothing away from law enforcement officers now. They're great officers, and I know that. I know most of them. They work exceptionally hard, but they see it more as a job as opposed to a passion. And that's the frustrating thing. And make no mistake, most of the officers see it as passion as well right now, but it's not the same. It feels different. And it's so unfortunate because of the Blake case, and of course 1310, and you also have 1054, which limits police tactics and maneuvers, and an example, the law enforcement can't use chokeholds anymore because of George Floyd, but law enforcement officers would tell you that chokehold is a less lethal use of force and oftentimes works very effectively, and it means that they don't pull a gun out or a taser ever. They use a chokehold to do exactly that, to put someone into submission. That's an example of the overreaction that you get in these circumstances.
And we get it in part because we've got a overreactive media that plays a part in all of this, unfortunately, in the big cities and on the national basis, that perpetuate the stories. You give airtime to people saying cops kill 3 people a day, every day, without any context about why and how that happens, which is just so unfair and
well, when you're involved with the police out in the streets, and you must become compliant, and all of these situations, you can't win in that circumstance because, once again, it's a whole different world. It's not the sanitized environment of a court, and because of that, every one of these cases involves somebody that determines that they're not going to follow the orders of a police officer. They believe they have a right to resist. Once you start heading down that road, it creates further problems immediately because law enforcement have a duty to not only protect other people but themselves as well. And therein lies the rub.
Sure. And what's the purpose for the resistance? Is it just because you are a closet legal rights scholar, or you got a trunk full of weapons? I mean, you don't know. You don't know.
Law enforcement officers don't know. They don't know when they engage someone out there, and that's why they do expect compliance, and things can be worked out later, but not out on the streets. And every officer that I've worked with in the years that I've been in this job, they have been accountable and responsible to the citizenry and all residents of Yakima County. And it absolutely is crystal clear that they care immensely about the people of our community.
Joe Brusic, we appreciate the difficult task that you have. We wonder sometimes why our deputies and sheriffs and police officers want to do what they do. And sometimes wonder about you, Joe, why you want to do that. But we're glad you do, and we're glad that you bring with you to this debate a strong concern for for ethics, fairness across the board to both sides of the legal interaction, from the police officer's point of view and from those folks being arrested. They have rights, but our police have
Absolutely.
rights, and both sides need to be honored and defended. So, Joe, thanks.
Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it.